By the time someone reaches out to a tax preparer, there's usually already a story playing in their head. Sometimes it's, I just need someone to plug the numbers in. Sometimes it's, my situation isn't that complicated. And sometimes it's, I've already done most of the work. None of those thoughts make someone careless. They make them human. But they also reveal one of the biggest misunderstandings about tax preparation, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Because tax preparation is not just data entry, and misunderstanding the role of tax preparer creates stress, mistakes, and unrealistic expectations. So today, I want to walk you through calmly and clearly what a tax preparer actually does, what they don't do, where responsibility shifts between client and preparer, and why understanding this division makes the entire process smoother. No fear, no shaming, no you should have known better, just clarity. Before we go any further, a quick framing note. This video is educational and informational only. It is not tax advice, it is not legal advice, and it is not representation before the IRS or any taxing authority. I'm explaining the role of a tax preparer at a high level so you can better understand how the process works and what's reasonable to expect. The idea that tax preparation is just data entry didn't come from nowhere. Software marketing plays a big role. So does DIY culture, and so does the way tax forms look from the outside. Where you see boxes and lines, it's easy to think, this is just filling in the blanks. But those boxes represent decisions. Each number reflects classification, timing, context, and often interpretation. The form is the last step, not the work itself. Most people interact with taxes only once a year. They don't see the review, the cross-checking, the judgment calls, the compliance considerations. They see the finished product. So the work becomes invisible, and invisible work often gets underestimated. Let's talk about what's actually happening behind the scenes. At a high level, a tax preparer's role includes interpreting information, not just entering it. A tax preparer doesn't just copy numbers, they evaluate what those numbers represent, how they should be reported, whether they align with other information. Two identical dollar amounts can have very different tax treatment depending on context. Applying tax law to real-world activity. Tax law doesn't happen in a vacuum. It applies to messy human businesses. A preparer matches business activity to tax rules, determines where income belongs, determines how expenses are treated, and applies rules consistently. This is judgment, not automation. Reviewing for consistency and reasonableness. Tax preparation includes reviewing income consistency, expense patterns, year-over-year changes, and obvious mismatches, not to judge, but to catch errors before filing. Identifying missing or unclear information. A preparer often spends time figuring out what isn't there. That might include missing forms, incomplete records, gaps in explanations, unanswered questions. This is where many returns slow down, not because someone is careless, but because real life is messy. Preparing a return that can be explained. A properly prepared return isn't just filed, it's defensible. That means the numbers tie together, the story makes sense, the positions taken can be explained if asked. Preparation includes thinking ahead, calmly, not fearfully. And this is just as important. A tax preparer does not create facts that don't exist. A preparer works with information provided. They don't invent income, expenses, or documentation. If something didn't happen, it can't be reported. Decide business activity retroactively. A preparer doesn't reclassify personal spending as business after the fact, change how money was used, or rewrite history. Tax prep reflects reality, it doesn't reshape it. Assume responsibility for records they didn't create. The client is responsible for maintaining records, providing accurate information, and answering questions truthfully. The preparer relies on that information. This is collaboration, not substitution. Make problems disappear. A tax preparer doesn't guarantee refunds, guarantee no balance due, guarantee no IRS contact. As we talked about in episode 2, those outcomes aren't controllable. When tax prep is treated as data entry, several things can happen. Context gets lost, errors go unnoticed, responsibility becomes unclear, and expectations become unrealistic. This is how people end up frustrated, not because someone did something wrong, but because the role was misunderstood. A calm but important truth. Software doesn't understand your business. A preparer does. Software doesn't ask follow-up questions. A preparer does. Software doesn't care if something doesn't make sense. A preparer does. And this is where clarity really matters. Clients are responsible for providing complete and accurate information, keeping records, responding to questions, and reviewing the return before filing. That doesn't mean clients need to understand tax law. It means they participate honestly in the process. This division of responsibility exists because clients know what actually happened. Preparers know how to report it. Neither role works without the other. Preparers are responsible for applying tax law appropriately, preparing returns accurately based on information provided, asking reasonable questions, explaining the return at a high level, and following ethical and professional boundaries. It's a shared process with defined roles. When roles are clear, fewer assumptions are made, fewer surprises happen, communication improves, and anxiety decreases. Most tax season stress comes from uncertainty, not complexity. So when you hear someone say, "I thought you were handling that," what they often meant is, "I didn't realize that was part of my responsibility." That's not failure, that's a communication gap, and clear expectations prevent that. This does not mean clients are on their own, preparers don't care, or the process should feel adversarial. It means each person knows their role. Support is structured. The process is calmer. Tax preparation isn't just plugging numbers into software. It's interpretation, it's review, it's judgment, and it's collaboration. When you understand what a tax preparer actually does and what they don't, the entire process becomes less intimidating and more manageable. So remember, tax preparation is a shared process. Clarity makes it work. If this episode helped clarify expectations, the rest of Tax Prep Calmly Explained will continue building on this foundation. In future episodes, we'll talk about what tax preparers are and aren't responsible for filing, how to read notices calmly, and what reasonable really looks like in practice. If you have educational questions, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching.